Remnant 2 will be turning 2 this year. That, or it already has, knowing how long it takes me to make content. With the anniversary of The Dark Horizon around the corner, I thought I'd make a quick video discussing what I'd like to see in a hypothetical new Remnant game. There's honestly a ton I would love to see make it in, but I've gone ahead and whittled it down to just 10 things. These suggestions range from simple tweaks to core gameplay overhauls. Now, some of these are a given, especially when considering the process of making a new game in the series. Just know that when I bring up a suggestion or change to an existing element in this video, I do so because I personally thought the way it was handled in Remnant 2 could have been better. And as a full disclaimer, I'm not a game designer. I'm also not the arbiter of what should and should not be in a Remnant game. My goal with this video is not to badmouth Gunfire or the work they've done on the Remnant games, but to share what I personally think would improve the experience going forward. Typically, these sorts of videos go in order of least to most desired, but I don't really have a concrete order of any kind. Out of my laundry list of suggestions, these 10 seemed the most prudent to place above the rest. Number 1. Better game performance. Now I know I literally just said I don't have an order for this list, but if I had to pick something for the number 1 spot, it would absolutely be performance. By far the number 1 issue I have with Remnant 2 is the quite frankly abhorrent performance of the game on PC. I have no experience with the console versions of Remnant 2, but if what Reddit tells me is true, the consoles did have issues early on in the game's life, but patches over time helped alleviate them. In my case, however, Remnant 2 has always run pretty bad, at least when I'm not playing with performance mode via Nvidia's DLSS setting. I'm not the first person to complain about the over-reliance of upscaling tech being used as a band-aid fix for poor game performance in modern video games, and I certainly will not be the last. Remnant 2 had the unfortunate fate of being one of the first non-tech demo games to be released on Unreal 5, and it really shows. Had the game come out today, there's a solid chance it could have been optimized way better. Look at Clair Obscure and Split Fiction, both of which were released this year. Those games look really damn good and are shockingly well optimized. Gunfire's early adaptation of Unreal 5 is undoubtedly one of its biggest flaws in my book. Yeah, the game looks great, but if I had the choice between better visuals or stable performance, I'll pick the latter almost every time. Now, my machine isn't the best by any means. I'll put a text block of my specs somewhere on the screen now. However, I can run plenty of other modern titles just fine, even at high settings. The most recent big-budget Unreal 5 game I've played was the Silent Hill 2 remake. Now that game has its own performance issues, but I was able to play at high settings the entire way through with a mostly stable 60 frames. It's experiences like these that really make me wish Remnant 2 had come out at least 1 year later. Before I move on, I also want to mention just how often this game crashes on me. Now this I believe is due to some of the mods I have installed. From what I've been told, it's just an inevitability of the mods at play. However, I know for a fact this game has some pretty nasty memory leaks. Not one video project of mine has gone by without the game completely freezing up due to a memory leak. It usually happens when I'm in the firing range and swapping weapons, mods, trinkets, archetypes, traits, etc. You know, the single most common place you'll ever do those actions. I'd be lying if I said the game's poor performance hasn't made me just stop working on projects for a day or so. If and when Remnant 3 ever comes out, good optimization has to be a top priority, especially as we step further and further into the upscaling age. Number 2. New locations. Now you might be saying, well, duh, it's a new game. Of course it's going to have new locations. And you'd be right. It only makes sense that Gunfire would design new areas for us to explore in a sequel. I only bring it up because a certain world has been in all 3 games so far. Yeisha, with all the love I have for it, needs to go. I really believe we've exhausted all there is to do there. Hell, the Ravager was a main boss on that planet twice. I better not see his shambling skeleton at the end of a dungeon for a 3rd time. Elements associated with Yeisha, like Dwell, are totally fine though. Honestly, I think it would be kinda cool to hear from him about how Yeisha's been doing since the Root were destroyed. He could even sell some weapons and trinkets from Yeisha as the story progressed. Earth is in a similar boat as Yeisha. While it does make sense to be a hub area given the ward's location, I really would prefer if we kept all future endeavors to new worlds. The glorified gauntlet at the end of Remnant 2's campaign did not inspire me to want to explore more of Earth. The only way I'd be willing to do another round of the planet would be if Remnant 2's ending radically changed it. But judging how Yeisha, Blossom, and Nerude all look identical to how they were pre-wipe, I am not confident that'll be the case. As for some locations I'd like to see in a potential sequel, I really think an oceanic world or mining planet would be really cool. Let me know where you'd like to see a 3rd Remnant game take place and what you might find there. Number 3. Reduce item bloat. One complaint I've voiced about Remnant 2 is the level of equipment bloat. There are just way too many things in the player's arsenal to properly maintain without a more dedicated balance team. Look no further than the number of rings in game. 225. In my humble opinion, more than half of them range from alright to really bad. I really believe you could just combine a ton of options together and call it a day. It'd significantly cut down on the work needed to model, texture, and write each new edition. I would rather have 50 impactful and well thought out rings than an incredibly mixed bag of 225. A lot of trinkets in Remnant 2 feel really underwhelming. Could they have been fixed if given enough attention? Technically yes, but the sheer amount of them is inevitably what caused this neglect to happen in the first place. Would it not be better to just start with a reasonable amount of well thought out trinkets, and then later only add more that are of similar quality? Like, obviously not all trinkets will be winners, but we can certainly reduce the number of duds by reeling things back a bit in production. Now there is the argument to be made about how impactful should each ring really be in your build since you do have 4 slots, but after seeing how things turned out by the end of the 3rd DLC, I think there's absolutely room for improvement. The same can be said for other aspects of the player's arsenal as well, though the severity of each case varies depending on the category. I think the number of guns in Remnant 2 is pretty solid. It's definitely teetering towards too many, but I think they actually stuck the landing by the 3rd DLC. With a few obvious exceptions, I think the balancing is generally pretty good. However, the number of melee weapons is way too high, especially with the number of non-boss melees. A lot of them just have shuffled values, to the point where there's barely a difference between some. I think they can keep non-boss melees only if they allow them to equip mods like normal weapons. And instead of having 2 or 3 non-boss variations of the same weapon type, you can instead just make them unlockable skins for that weapon type instead. Maybe they could even function like mods for the base weapon and change their appearance like they do for guns. Making every option in a player's arsenal feel impactful and unique takes a lot of time and effort. Reducing the total number of variables can help get things right the first time, and makes adjusting them down the line with balance patches much easier. Number 4. More difficulty options. Difficulty in the Remnant series has always been a choice of one of several options, and I think that's totally fine. For the most part, each difficulty serves its purpose well enough. In Remnant 2's case, however, Apocalypse has always felt pretty easy, especially to the more hardcore players. One answer to this problem would be to just crank up the numbers of Apocalypse, or create a new difficulty entirely. However, I think a more interesting solution would be that of a selectable modifier system. If they could be applied before or after rolling a campaign or adventure, and most importantly, would not be locked to a specific difficulty. These modifiers could be anything, from giving enemies a chance to be an aberration mini-boss, to giving dungeon and world bosses brand new moves. As someone who has clocked in a collective 2,300 hours into both Remnant 1 and 2, additional modifiers like these would add a ton of variety and replay value to both new game runs and repeat playthroughs on existing characters. They'd also help prevent nerdy tryhards online from complaining that the game is too easy. Nerdy tryhards like me. Number 5. Bring back interesting traits. While I am a big fan of traits being shifted to a pick-and-choose system, I do think there were far too many defensive and utility options in the roster. I'm fine with them existing, of course, I just think the system could have used some direct damage options to give players a more interesting choice in how they spend their points. I also think leveling traits should be a bit more involved, and by that I think some traits should encourage you to spend points even if you don't max them out by granting additional stats. Even a simple threshold bonus at 5 points invested could be an enticing reason. Take Shadeskin for example. When maxed out, it grants you 20% elemental damage resistance. What if, at 5 points invested, it also granted you 10% elemental damage? Level 10 could boost it more or grant an entirely new stat. Obviously, not every trait needs incentives like this. I just think it would encourage players to spice things up once in a while when deciding what traits to run. Number 6. Spice up archetype leveling. Back in May, I played Doom the Dark Ages and it was really fun. By far, one of my favorite aspects of the game was the weapon upgrading system and the choices it gave the player. The game let you pick one of 2 usually impactful options that shaped the way you played with them. And if you weren't a fan of one of them, you could easily swap to the other option whenever you liked. Different encounters might be better suited for a different upgrade, but you can totally stick with one upgrade path if you feel like it. I bring this up because I think archetypes in the next Remnant game could benefit from a similar system. As they currently stand, archetypes in Remnant 2 are roughly 80% static. The skills they have are impactful, but they're only unlocked at level 5 and 10. Levels 1 to 4 are about unlocking your perks, which range from stat boosts to new mini effects and abilities when playing with the archetype. Levels 6 through 9 are improvements to said perks. While it can feel a little cool to check out what leveling up your archetype does in the menu, I believe giving the player a choice of 2 options every level up would elevate that sense of excitement when you hear and see that level up notification. These choices would obviously be in theme with the archetype. Take Alchemist for example. Panacea is their team perk. It allows you to share curative consumables with your friends and increase their effective resistance. We can keep this as one option and offer the player another. For example, using a consumable grants all allies within 15 meters 15% increased action speed for 15 seconds. This gives players the choice between a defensive and offensive team perk option. If one isn't working for you, you can swap to the other anytime. This change to the Archetype system would make users feel like they're being given impactful choices every time they level up, and encourage them to swap aspects of their archetype when something isn't working. Number 7. Bring back armor bonuses and skins. For most of Remnant 2's life, I'd say armor being simplified was a good thing. However, around the second DLC is when I really started to wish armor did more again. Now, some armor pieces do still have synergy with trinkets, but their effects are so minuscule they might as well not even be there. Heading into R3, I would definitely like to see armor be brought back into the spotlight. Not in the same way they were in Remnant 1, of course. Archetypes were specifically designed to be an evolution of the armor set bonuses. I'd prefer if armor simply gave small bonuses. Something fitting with the theme of the set would be nice. As an example, the Zealot set could give 5% increased status damage per equipped piece. Maybe you could even throw in something for wearing the full set. 20% may seem too much or too little depending on who you ask. I want armor to make a difference, but not so much that you feel obligated to wear it, and not so little that it comes across as pointless. One issue that comes with giving stats back to armor is the inevitability that you'll get players that don't like the look of the armor, but do like the bonuses they give. I think the simplest solution to this problem would be to just let players transmog their armor. It's been a highly requested feature for Remnant 2 since launch. I'd also like to see the concept of armor recolors make a return. They were one of the coolest parts of armor in the first game, and it gave players something worthwhile to grind for. Number 8. Reduce the time and grind to find and upgrade everything. This is something I think we can all agree on. The amount of time it takes to max out everything in a Remnant game is a lot. For the average player that goes through the campaign once, never touches adventure mode, or rerolls their story, this typically isn't an issue. However, if you stick around and really want to get into the nitty-gritty of build crafting, min-maxing, and the general experimentation that makes the Remnant game so deep, good luck spending hours running around dozens of adventures on the easiest difficulty to collect all the different forms of iron, luminite, and simulacrum you're going to need to do so. Remnant 1 added in a system that let you break down higher quality iron to get the previous tiers easier. They removed that feature in Remnant 2, and there wasn't any sort of system to help with the grind until almost 2 months after launch. They gave rigs the ability to downgrade your weapons, which was really nice, especially for the time when we had literally no way of getting any sort of refund. While this addition was a positive one, I still think it can be improved even more. In the next Remnant game, I say we keep the downgrade system, but instead of only getting back 75% of the scrap and materials, give the players everything back and let them experiment. This sounds like a radical change on paper, but ask yourself, have you ever upgraded a weapon thinking you'd like it, only to find out you don't, and now you're thousands of scrap poor and down precious resources? By letting the player freely refund their upgrades, you're encouraging them to experiment more than ever before. For the average player that doesn't want to sink a lot of time into the grinding to play with all the weapons they found, now they don't have to. They can simply downgrade the weapons they're done with and go right on to the next shiny toy. On top of this change, I think they should make whichever character sells materials in the next game have an unlimited amount after beating the campaign. These changes would not only help players with the grind in the endgame, but also to those who are still making their way through the main story that want to experiment with their equipment. Number 9. Real melee system. This one is probably the least likely to be added in a potential sequel, but I'm talking about it anyway. Remnant has always been a shoot first, slice later sort of deal. You use your guns 90% of the time and only resort to melee when you're out of ammo, trying to conserve ammo, trying to activate a trinket, etc. You can fully invest in melee and make your way through most of the bosses in game. However, there are some encounters where pure melee just is not a viable option. Yes, we have ranged melees, but we really should not need to rely on those if we want to do full melee. Most ranged melees also have their charge attacks replaced with the throw, meaning you can't even utilize close range charge attacks to hit multiple nearby targets. They force you into making a single shot, which wouldn't be an issue with a more refined melee system that allowed for more button combinations. Remnant doesn't need Dark Souls levels of melee complexity, but literally any improvement to the system would be welcome in my book. The only real downside I could see to this sort of change is that gunfire might be a bit more restricted when it comes to how they design their bosses. Like, I love Annihilation, but that fight in pure melee is not the greatest. There are some spots where you can hit him with melee, but otherwise you're just kind of forced to use ranged melee. Number 10. Enemy Bestiary. Perhaps this one is even less likely to be added than a full melee rework. I would definitely argue it's a far more worthwhile inclusion though, especially for the average player experience. How often have you asked yourself, what is this boss weak to? Well, unless you're up to do some data mining, there's no way of knowing, short of testing every single damage type against them. That, or checking the wikis. This issue can be entirely remedied by simply including a bestiary of encountered enemies. These entries don't need to be insanely detailed, although the writers could use the space to mention cool lore bits about the creatures in the world they're from. I'd mostly be looking for elemental resistances, weaknesses, weak spot location, attack damage, and health. Maybe they could even reuse concept art for these entries to make it look like our character is drawing them in their journal. This change would elevate the thrill of exploring new worlds, as your character would literally become more knowledgeable as they adventure around. Also, any addition that reduces the need to check wikis is honestly a major plus. Don't get me wrong, there are some well-managed wikis out there, and I admire the community's dedication to documenting every little detail about the game. But the less time I have to spend googling what the weakness of Green Slug number 7 is, the better. And that pretty much covers all the major topics I wanted to discuss. There's honestly way more, which is why you're now seeing a list of honorable mentions scroll by the screen as I speak. The next Remnant game has the potential to be the absolute best entry in the series if Gunfire plays their cards right. That being said, I'm only one nerd on the internet. Leave a comment with your own list of things you'd like to see in a potential sequel. I'd love to read them. The next video will actually be the Gunslinger Archetype one this time. I just wanted to get a shorter video out before the 2-year anniversary, but as I'm recording this, it's already like 4 days after the anniversary. Oops. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.